Good morning, everyone. Good morning for those in Brazil. Good afternoon for those in India and Russia, and good evening for those in China. My name is José Nantala, and I am one of the founding members of GEBRICS. And I have the honor and the pleasure here to host this panel, this very important panel of our 5th BRICS conference on the University of São Paulo. It's a great pleasure to be alongside distinguished panelists who will be presenting today. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsors, especially Ibrachina, who is our host and who has been a partner and a very important partner of our GEBRICS. I would also like to thank SABIA, BRICS IEA, the FGS, and the SIARB, all very important partners of our study group here in the University of São Paulo, who are always helping us to develop an event like this, an international event like this. It has many challenges, even from schedule to connection issues, as we are fully online. I have here with me Professor Pedro Dallari, one of the most important professors of our law school of the University of São Paulo and also of the Institute of International Relations. It's a big pleasure to be here with you, Professor Pedro. And finally, I would like to introduce you to Professor Marcos Troyjo. Marcos Troyjo is the first Brazilian to become a president of an international bank. He is the president of the New Development Bank, the NDB, an international bank who has been referenced in almost all the panels that we promoted during this journey of the 5th BRICS conference. And Marcos Troyjo was also the former Brazilian Deputy Minister of Economy and Social Secretary for Foreign Trade and International Affairs. Professor Marcos, it's a great pleasure to have you with us here in our study group. We are mostly academics, students, and teachers, and here something from you will be very much valuable for all of us and for the whole audience. Professor Pedro, please, the floor is yours for your initial remarks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, dear Nantala. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here at this final conference or meeting of this huge conference. I would like firstly to congratulate all the organizers of this meeting, my dear friend, Professor Paulo Casella, who is the inspirator of all this Center of BRICS Studies at the University of São Paulo, and all the organizers that worked very hardly, as I saw, to build this very interesting conference with an international perspective. And I would also like to say the honor for us to receive here President Marcos Troyjo of the New Development Bank. It's a very important opportunity, President Troyjo, for our students, for all the community that studies BRICS all around the world, to listen you as you are the president of the most important arm of the BRICS in the field of economy, the New Development Bank. And I understand perfectly that you are very busy, and the fact that you can be with us is an honor for us. Thank you very much. And as we were talking before the beginning of the session, you are also a former student of our university with the University of São Paulo. So we are double honored for your presence here as the president of the bank, but also as a former student of our university, the University of São Paulo. We are very interested to listen to you, but I want, as a presentation, just to make a first question to open and a little bit provocative, but in order to that we can enjoy your presence with us. The New Development Bank was created by the movement of the political movement of the BRICS in order to organize some emerging countries, as we can say like that, Brazil, China, Russia, India, and South Africa, that from 2009 began at the first summit to build an arrangement in order to influence the multilateral field, just to make these countries more active, more influent in the building of the world guidelines, the world governance guidelines. And all the documents, the BRICS documents from the first of 2009 until now, emphasize the idea of peace, of international security and peace. This is one of the motives of BRICS. And when the New Development Bank was created by the agreement of 2014, there was in the preamble the idea of economic cooperation, close relations among BRICS, but all around the world. What I want to say is that BRICS and the New Development Bank was created in the perspective of a more effective presence of the founding countries in the field of global governance in order to promote peace and international security in a broad sense. But in this year, we had the war. The invasion of Russia on Ukraine changed a lot world perspective, create a new reality. Now we are dealing with the possibility of use of nuclear weapons. So the perspective of peace and international security, which was on the basis of the creation of BRICS and the New Development Bank, collapsed. BRICS are now not even more effective reality because of this situation of war. It's curious because I was reading the summit, the document that was produced on the, let me find here, on 2022 on June, with the Beijing summit, and the document from June 23 of this year, after the beginning of the war, talk about deepening cooperation on economy, peace, and security. But how we can deepen cooperation on peace with a war promoted by one of the BRICS members? So my question, in order to stimulate your very important presence with us is exactly that, how we can deal with this perspective of the work together for peace and security with this the war working on a very terrible impact for human rights, for civilization. There is a contradiction, and what I want to listen is how you see the work of the New Development Bank in order to promote this new perspective of peace, the issue of our this closing speech is BRICS in the construction of new parameters for international consultation. How can BRICS and the New Development Bank work in these new parameters for international consultation with the war in perspective? This is what I want to ask you to introduce your presentation, because I'm sure that this will be a very important moment for us to listen you talking about these very important issues that we are dealing now in the reality of the contemporary world. Thank you very much for your presence with us, Marcos Troyjo, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Dallari. It's a privilege for me to address this very relevant set of discussions put together by GEBRICS. I also wanted to say hi to Professor Paulo Casella, to José Nantala and José Ricardo, who I know have put in a lot of effort in making this happen. This is a multifold discussion. It involves so many different areas of knowledge, as you have, Professor Dallari, mentioned in your initial remarks. But it's interesting. I mean, I think the privilege is only made bigger, as you've said, for the fact that I was a student at the University of São Paulo. I'm an alum of this, which is Latin America's greatest knowledge center, the University of São Paulo. I did my master's degree with Professor Fernando Augusto Albuquerque Mourão as the director for my master's thesis. I went on to get my PhD also under the direction of Fernando Mourão. And it was interesting because he was a tripartite scholar. So he would spend time at the law school. He would spend time at the School of Philosophy and Social Sciences, where I did my PhD. But he was, and I think above all, an internationalist at heart, one of the pioneers in the study of international relations in Brazil. When I decided to do my master's degree in my PhD with him, there was no very well cut area of international relations as, say, a social science in Brazil. The first undergraduate courses were just being assembled. So I see him really as a pioneer, and I miss him greatly over the past couple of years. So I'm truly honored also to be part of this conversation here as an alum of our great university. Well, you see, BRICS is a concept evolving through time. The first time the acronym was conceived, it was the result of a study into the future of the global economy put together by the investment bank Goldman Sachs. So if we all board a time machine and go back to the year 2001, the very beginning of the 21st century, we would have the then president of the asset management division of Goldman Sachs looking into the future. He was polishing his crystal ball, and he was asking the gods of the future, so what are the top emerging economies and the drivers of economic growth, say, within the next 3 decades? And then, because of its relative size, because of the size of its territory, the size of its population, the leadership in regional matters, Jim O'Neill, put together this concept, the BRICS. So Brazil, Russia, India, China would be more and more the drivers of economic growth going forward. So if we look back at the first concept of BRICS, which is now about 20, 21 years old, much of the prophecy, if you want to describe it that way, has been actually materialized. So yes, we have seen over this past 20 years the dramatic expansion of the economy of China. We have seen the dramatic expansion of the economy of India. Brazil and Russia have also had GDP expansions, not as vibrant and robust as the two other BRICS, but there has been expansion there to the extent that right now, Brazil, Russia, India, China, the original four BRICS, have taken a bigger and bigger slice of the global economic pie. They are taking a much bigger piece of the GDP cake than they did 2 decades ago. And naturally, when this first BRICS concept came about, a number of actions followed. So there was an asset class. Some investment banks would put together asset classes, investment products that were targeted at capital investment in some of the BRICS most important companies. Ideas that there would probably be a taking over from the part of this BRICS countries vis-a-vis more traditional manufacturing economies of Europe and North America. But then, Professor Dallari, as you have described, as we wedge close towards the end of the first decade of the 21st century, the BRICS themselves, the countries, instead of being defined by outside, they decided to define themselves. So BRICS went beyond just being a relative prophecy for the future of the global economy. And this is, no, let us take destiny in our own hands. And as you have mentioned, have a bigger say in global governance matters. Let us create a platform for discussion, for cooperation, for sizing up, for building on our shared interests. And then not only the original four BRICS were there, but a member of the African continent was also added into the group. So then we're also talking about BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, plus South Africa, right? So the first age of BRICS, this one, or the first meaning, the first concept of BRICS, which I like to call BRICS 1.0, is BRICS as meaning the future of the global economy and meaning destination for foreign direct investment or for portfolio investment. And then we have BRICS 2.0. So BRICS 2.0 is a platform for international cooperation involving some of the most important emerging economies of the 21st century. And I think you're absolutely right. The scope in which discussions take place at BRICS 2.0 is as horizontal as one could think. It is truly amazing, Professor Dallari, when you think of, for example, the BRICS the BRICS presidency and the kind of events, the multiple events that take place over the course of 365 days. So yes, there is a summit of heads of state. Yes, there is a summit of ministers who are responsible for the economy. But then you have ministers of agriculture who meet regularly, ministers of tourism, of the environment. You have people who work in tax collection. You have fiscal authorities that exchange ideas. There are ideas that are exchanged when it comes to health, when it comes to research and development, science and technology. So the amount of cooperation and exchange that actually takes place is truly remarkable. And then the first question I think we could ask ourselves is, having these exchanges, having these regular conversations, knowing who the other party is it something that improves or deteriorates global governance? It is my perception that this is a great help for better international understanding, for better international coordination, and therefore for creating, as the very title of our conversation intends to describe, new parameters for international concertation, right? I was, Professor Dallari, a number of years ago. I mean, I mean, I have really lived the life of a gypsy because I'm an economist and a social science. Then I went into the diplomatic career. I was with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for 10 years. And one of the assignments I had abroad was to be posted to the Brazilian mission to the United Nations in New York. And, the United Nations is a very complex organism, but one of the cores of the United Nations is the Security Council. And then I kept thinking to myself, what a brilliant idea it was to create a Security Council, because the most important powers of the world, they are all together in the same room discussing. Not always is it possible to find consensus. Not always is it possible to build a common agenda. But the people are there exchanging ideas and trying to find common ground. So I think that's extraordinarily important. Let me give you another example. I sat the entrance examination to the diplomatic career and was admitted 30 years ago, 1992. So in the 1990s, if you ask yourselves, how many times a year would a Brazilian president exchange viewpoints, ideas with an Indian prime minister? That would almost never happen. It was very, very rare, right? When would a Brazilian president exchange ideas with the president of China? That was extremely rare. It was a very, not at all something that you would expect to happen in a number of years, in a couple of years. Not to mention something that would happen a number of times in one particular year. So because of the BRICS platform today, we have meetings of our heads of state when you have the BRICS summit. We have our heads of state getting together when they sit under the G20 platform. You have the opening of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and whenever possible, they exchange ideas. So this is very important because it seems to me that the closer we are, the more cooperation we have, the more opportunities to exchange we have, the better the results. I think, Professor Dallari, if you compare, for example, the current juncture to that of other international crises that we've had in the past, for example, in 2008 with the crisis of the subprime, the fall of Lehman Brothers, the Great Recession that followed the derivatives crisis in different financial markets across the world, the 2011 crisis of European Mediterranean economies. So if you compare today to that specific opportunity, you would see that there was much more a desire to cooperate and find common solutions back then than you do today. I think it would only be fair to acknowledge that today the world experiences a great deficit in international cooperation. And the BRICS platform is there to add its contribution to more exchange, to more concentration, even when sometimes the points of view are not the same. But consensus is sought. We're trying to exchange as you better understand the other party. So I think more than ever, this BRICS platform is extraordinarily relevant for economic governance, global governance in general. And I think, therefore, the world is better with BRICS than without BRICS. I think it's something that we should acknowledge and praise. With that being said, let me go back a little bit to BRICS 2.0, which is once again this creation of a platform and the perfectioning of a platform that is multi-dimensional in terms of exchanging ideas, finding consensus, and having common projects. Because that kind of effort does not take place in the void. There is a bigger backdrop in the world today. There's a bigger backdrop. And I think that the bigger backdrop, Professor Dallari, I like to call it the new chapter of globalization, right? So there was a chapter in globalization following the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, all the way to the Great Recession of 2008. Then I think that chapter was closed and a new chapter opened with 2008, all the way to Brexit and to the risk of deglobalization. But now there's a new chapter out there. There's a new chapter that is opening. It's very much in the making, But I think that some of the most important characteristics that will define this new chapter are already being drafted. And some would say, well, this new chapter of globalization will be about four things. It will be about the omnipresence of pandemics. So we're no longer talking about a post-COVID world, but a with COVID world. So, and even if it's not COVID, it will be a new variant of a pandemic that will forever alter the way we travel, the way we do business, the way we think about health and security. So there's that trait. There's another one, which is, well, today we're undergoing the most perhaps delicate geopolitical situation in the heart of Europe since the end of World War II. Others would say the economic challenge is even more daunting because 2020, for example, is perhaps the most, dire economic year since the 1930s and the Great Depression. And then others would say the fourth characteristic of this new chapter of globalization is stagflation. Stagflation that is much more severe and widespread across the world if compared to the phenomenon we saw in the 1970s and the 1980s. And it is true that it's amazing to realize that, for example, for every $6 that are circulating around the world today, one simply did not exist 18 months ago. So a dramatic expansion of the monetary base, a dramatic expansion on fiscal stimulus, particularly in the US and Europe. And that's leading now to this almost bizarre situation in which Brazil has a lower inflation rate than the US, than the UK, than France, than Germany. And therefore, this stagflation would be with us for a number of years. So my impression is that if you package all of these four characteristics together, I would argue, Professor Dallari, that these are not the most structural drivers of the new chapter of globalization. They're not the most important drivers. And the example that I like to give, the image that I like to describe in order to illustrate what I'm trying to say is that the other day, I was in an apartment and there were four beautiful birds who had just landed on the windowsill. And I said, these are beautiful birds. I'm going to take a picture of the birds. At the moment that I took a picture of the birds, in the background, there was an airplane taking off, right? So because of the optical effect, when you look into the picture, the birds seem bigger than they look bigger than the airplane taking off. So because we're living the cycles of 24 hours, it seems that, these are more consequential than what's happening in the background. But there's an airplane taking off, and that is what's most, structural in terms of defining this new chapter of globalization. And for me, this airplane is made up of four events. So one is today, if you take into account the gross domestic product, the GDP, measured at what economists call the purchasing power parity. So it's a way to measure the GDP that does away with the oscillations of the exchange rate. And if you pile them together, the so-called G7, right? The G7 have been meeting since the 1970s. So the US, Japan, Germany, the UK, France, Italy, and Canada, they have a combined GDP measured at purchasing power parity terms of $49 trillion. Okay, so that's the G7 put together. Now, if you take into account what I like to call the E7, so the biggest emerging economies of the world, let's name them: China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, Mexico, and Turkey. They already have in 2022 a combined GDP, once again measured at purchasing power parity terms, of $60 trillion. So the E7 is already bigger than the G7 in purchasing power parity terms. Even if you take out Mexico and Turkey, and you only have the BRICS there. If you take away Indonesia and Mexico, you only have the four BRICS in purchasing power parity terms. They are already bigger than the G7. And then you might say, well, but this has happened because of the relative size of China. the economic expansion in China has been so extraordinary, so exponential since the beginning of the century that China sort of imbalances the way you measure things. But let us suppose, Professor Dallari, we take away China from the E7. And at the same time, we take away the US, the United States, from the G7. The E6 is bigger than the G6. So we are living a situation that is far from just being about China. It's about the emerging world. If you want to support that by the recent data coming from the International Monetary Fund that was released a couple of days ago during their annual meeting, the sources, the engines of economic growth over the next a couple of years will be big emerging economies with big populations. So that creates an extraordinary opportunity for cooperation, an extraordinary opportunity for cooperation. And I'm going to exemplify this by referring to Brazil-China trade, right? So, for example, when BRICS was first fought off in 2001, right? Brazil-China trade, everything that Brazil exported plus everything that China exported, Brazil-China trade was $1 billion a year, 2001. Today, Brazil-China trade is $1 billion every 60 hours. Brazil-China trade is $1 billion a day every 60 hours. And because of the, once again, rise of the emerging markets, now in 2022, we are experiencing a situation in which Brazil exports more to China than it does to the European Union and the United States combined. Brazil exports more to India than it does to the UK. Brazil exports more to Vietnam than it does to Switzerland. Brazil exports more to Malaysia than it does to Italy. Brazil exports more to Thailand than it does to France. So these are opportunities that are resulting from, once again, the rise of the emerging world. And the good news here, I think, and once again, because we are speaking from a Brazilian perspective here, it's an event put together by the University of São Paulo. Think about it, Professor Dallari. Let us take the projections of China's economy over the next 10 years. And let's take into consideration that China today has a nominal GDP of about $17 trillion, right? And let us also suppose that growth in China over the next decade stabilizes at about 4% a year. So if China grows at 4% a year out of a $17 trillion basis, that means that China will add about $680 billion to its GDP every year, right? $680 billion is the incremental result of China growing at 4% a year. Now, let us take into account that China grows at 4% a year over a decade. Look at the result that you get. Today, the biggest economy of the world, GDP, nominal GDP-wise, is the United States, about $23 trillion. The second biggest economy of the world, GDP-wise, is China at $17 trillion. And the third biggest economy of the world, nominal GDP-wise, is Japan, with about 5.56. Well, if China is growing $640 billion a year incrementally, that means that in 10 years, the biggest economy of the world will either be the US or China. The second biggest economy of the world will either be US or China. But the third biggest economy of the world will be a China that does not exist, but that will be created as a result of the incremental expansion of China's GDP over this next 10 years. And then you look at a country like India. India, for the 5 years preceding COVID, and what we've had in 2021 and 2022, shows that India is outgrowing China in percentage terms, right? And mathematicians have really revealed to us, Professor Dallari, a true magic trick, which is the so-called rule of 70. So let us suppose, for example, you want to size up how long it takes for an economy to double its income per capita based upon the rate of growth of its economy over a year, right? So let us suppose that India is growing at 7%. So the name of the trick is the rule of 70. So you divide 70 by 7, you get 10. So 10 is the number of years that it takes for India to double its income per capita. Now, also, let's take into account that India's GDP per capita today is about $3,000. So if in a space of a decade, you're moving from a $3,000 GDP to a $6,000 GDP, you know what happens, Professor Dallari, with that incremental income? And this is not only, say, a wild idea, but it's something that is supported by both economic literature and experience. People eat more, and people invest more in infrastructure. So the countries of the BRICS not only have some of the biggest markets in the world for food and for energy and for infrastructure, but they also have some of the biggest producers of food in the world. India, Brazil, China, and the US are the top food producers in the world. I was telling you, Professor, that I came back from this fall meetings of the multilateral organizations. And generally, in occasions such as those, people talk about emerging market debt, they talk about inflation, they talk about projections for economic growth. But this year, there was something that was omnipresent, and it was discussion about food security, right? So the BRICS, again, they have some of the most important players in this field, which I think will be defining in the years to come. Just very briefly, the other three areas that I think will bring about this new chapter of globalization, they're all central to BRICS. They're all central to the way forward. One, yes, one is E7 bigger than G7. Two, yes, there is a redrafting of global supply chains, but the phenomenon is much broader than that. It's not only about supply; the entire value network is being rerouted. And as you said, when you look at demand, for example, a country like Brazil may find a more favorable market in Thailand than in a traditional market in Europe. You may find better research and develop partnerships with the emerging world than you would with the traditional, more mature economies. So the traditional international division of labor that we've grown used to is actually evolving a lot. Number three, it's about talent. So yes, in this new chapter of globalization, it is going to be about talent. Talent has become perhaps the single most important factor of production. And there are big pools of talent in countries like India, like Russia, like China, Brazil, South Africa, the emerging world. So we have to nurture talent to make sure that we keep up to speed over in this domain. And fourth, it's also about infrastructure. And here, Professor Dallari, I would say that infrastructure, like so many other things in the world, is also changing a lot. So we're talking about the metamorphosis of infrastructure. So it's not only about roads and airports and ports. Of course, these are central. They continue to be enormously important. But there is going to be, and we see this more and more, a kind of fusion, a marriage between physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure, tech-intensive infrastructure. So even if you're talking about social infrastructure like a school building, when we conceptualize how best to organize it, it's not about only putting the construction together, but making sure that that unit has, for example, the connectivity elements to keep teachers and students together in distance learning in case in-person classes are not happening because of a pandemic or any other reason. And here, of course, the new development bank, as you mentioned, has a very big role to play. To think that only 7.5 years ago, the institution only existed on paper or existed as a dream, and now it's a fully functioning development institution with project approvals that are north of $30 billion in water, sanitation, urban mobility, airports. It's truly remarkable. The new development bank is another musician in the orchestra. So there are many multilateral institutions are there. You have the World Bank, you have the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, you have the IADB. So you have many, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as well. So the new development bank is another musician in this orchestra that's there to mobilize resources. Our mandate, the mandate of the new development bank, is infrastructure investment and sustainable development. So it's narrow in a sense, but it sort of concentrates its focus on some of the most needed sectors of emerging economies. And it's been very successful so far. It's not only about the amount of resources that you're able to mobilize, but also the quality of the development impact. that you can extract from them. This is the focus of what we're doing, improving things institutionally as well. It's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity. And at this point, I think now we're close to running out of time. I wanted once again to express, my deep gratitude for being able to participate in this conversation, Professor Dallari. Thank you very much, and thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, President Troyjo. It was very interesting. You made a very broad speech about the history of BRICS and the emerging of the new development bank, this perspective of different periods and steps in order to build this institution. It was a very interesting approach. Thank you very much. The elements you gave to us about the economic aspects of this integration system is very interesting, and I'm sure that the students, all the people that are with us, will enjoy a lot what you said, and will have ideas to develop their studies and their research, what is the perspective of this kind of conference. Thank you very much. Have a nice meeting in Egypt, and Nantala, you have the word to finish our session.
It was very delightful to listen to you, Professor Marcos Troyjo, and Professor Pedro Dallari as well. And on behalf of GEBRICS, I would like to state my gratitude to both of you to be here with us, participating on this very important project of our GEBRICS. We have material for a whole new conference now after Marcos Troyjo's presentation. So we hope you come back and we have more time to discuss all those issues that you raised, and also to build bridges with your BRIC lab in Colombia, which we are very interested since the beginning, Professor Marcos. And once more, thank you so much, and thank you for all the audience and for future listeners, that I'm sure this video will be almost viralized, at least in academic terms, for other people that were not participating live with us here. So thank you once more. Thank you all, and let's go on. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.